Welcome to History and Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today is 10th of August, and I continue with my series on the Ukraine war. And as always, I concentrate on new developments and new challenges that has arisen in the last week or so. And I will be starting with 5 questions that I'd like to answer today. Number 1 is, what was the purpose of 40 days campaign of drone strikes on Russia that has just ended? President Zelensky's 40 days drone hits on Russia. Number 2, what were the means of this campaign? And obviously drones, and we'll discuss that. Number 3, what was actually accomplished by Zelensky and by the Ukrainian forces during this 40-day drone offensive? Number 4, what has been Russian response? And we'll go through the offensive, defensive measures and the political consequences. Number 5, what is Trump up to with his latest announcement of new negotiations with Russia to end the Ukraine war? And finally, number 6, the actions of the EU, and that has to do with the frozen Russian assets and help to Ukraine. So I start with number 1. And the official purpose, as Zelensky himself has announced, was to force Russia to negotiating table. This is, of course, only a formula, because everybody knows that Russia is at the negotiating table, and Russia has presented its points, its a plan that was agreed and encouraged and then modified, etc. But it boils down to 4 provinces on Donbas that seceded from Ukraine, plus neutralization of Ukraine, plus no foreign troops, plus the rights of Russian-speaking population, restoration of the church, etc. So everybody knows these terms, but what Zelensky actually wanted is to force Russia to accept a compromise, meaning that Ukraine stays where it is and keeps the parts of Donbas. And he has repeated many times that Ukraine is not going to withdraw, that they're going to stay, etc., etc. So the purpose is not really to force to the negotiating table, but to force Russia to accept Ukraine's conditions. And for that reason, they started this drone offensive, which is very much connected with Minister of Defense Fyodorov, who was lately fired, and I have a video on that. So let's go to the means. Item number 2. The means were, of course, drones, and they are called FP, which stands for Firepoint. It's a Ukrainian company which is heavily supported by the Western allies of Ukraine. Some of the production is claimed to be in Ukraine. Some of it is claimed to be underground. Most of it has been transferred to various Western countries where various components are put together, in Denmark, in Germany, in Poland, in France, and the addresses of these companies have been published by the Russian Ministry of Defense. So these are the means. Now, one thing that has been announced, and this is new, just a couple of days ago, and you can check yourself in the Kiev Post, this is the Ukrainian newspaper, that FP Firepoint is developing a new, not really a drone anymore, but a missile, a ballistic missile that is supposed to be able to hit Moscow, and it will go into production in October. One thing I'd like to take to respond to that is that there's this equation. The more the Ukrainian drones are sophisticated, and the more they look like and act like ballistic missiles or cruise missiles, the easier it is for the Russians to shoot them, because the Russians have one of the best air defense systems that was designed to intercept and shoot down ballistic missiles. What it was not designed to do is to intercept toy airplanes and handheld drones that could fly 10 meters off the ground and hit an oil storage and create a nice photo opportunity of black smoke. In other words, Russia's problem was small drones, and they were the ones that have inflicted significant damage to Russian facilities. That brings me to point number 3, which is what was accomplished. And the Ukrainians have been boasting and crying all over the world about their achievements, and supposedly the war has turned, and supposedly they're winning, and all this was done for propaganda purposes to get more money out of the European Union and of the Americans. What exactly was accomplished was a lot of oil facilities were hit. And according to the most optimistic for the Ukraine scenarios, they put out of line 40% of Russian oil facilities. So much so that Russia responded by buying gasoline in the neighboring countries to overcome the shortage. This is a great achievement from the point of view of Zelensky, but from the point of view of strategic purpose, nothing was accomplished. And I will come back to it because destroying oil facilities does not stop the Russian army. On top of it, there was significant damage done to grain exports of Russia that had to be rerouted not away from the Black Sea. And there was a lot of civilian infrastructure hit: apartment buildings, cafe in Moscow, a beach in Gelendzhik, and many other civilian casualties in the adjacent to Ukraine provinces of Kursk and Bryansk and Belgorod. So these are the accomplishments. Now, the accomplishments met a Russian response. And I will briefly discuss Russian response in two parts: the defensive measures and the offensive measures. The defensive measures, there's a big discussion going on in Russian media among specialists and generals and all kinds of others, which explains a situation like this. That the drones fly very, very low. And in order to intercept them, one has to see them. And in order to see them, one has to have a serious line of defense, about 40 or 50 kilometers, towers that intercept, that get the signal that they're flying. And then they could engage various kinds of interceptors, not only missiles, but all kinds of other ones, including high caliber machine guns and lasers and small airplanes and all kinds of other ones. This has been done, and very successfully. So the statistics in Ukrainian sources is that of the 1,500 drones sent recently against Moscow, recently means a week or two, only one got through, only one, over 1,500. 80% of them were intercepted at the Moscow province, and then another 20 or so, 15% in the approaches to the Moscow city limits, and only one got through to Moscow itself. In other words, Russian defenses work, and work effectively, but this is just around Moscow. That means that other facilities are not yet totally defended. Now, they are developing these towers and these teams that will defend now oil facilities, and they have already put in countermeasures to defend the Crimea highway. And then when the Ukrainians saw that it doesn't work, they switched to hitting commercial facilities of wild berries, which is an equivalent of Amazon in Russia. These are unprotected, and it was an easy target. And so this is what the Ukrainians are doing. When they encounter Russian defensive measures, they go for easier targets, which means civilian targets, such as beaches and cafes and others. But that represents a war crime, and I'll come back to it later in this program. So these are defensive measures. In terms of offensive measures, the Russians, as we all know, have intensified their assault on Ukraine. This can be seen as a direct result of the Zelensky's 40-day drone offensive. So this is like a payback. Oh, you do that? Well, we'll hit you back. And every day you could see on the website of the Russian Ministry of Defense a list of official targets. And these are mostly industrial sites, such as PowerPoint factories and various other factories producing war material. And then, of course, the port infrastructure, which has been almost completely destroyed, not only in Odessa, but in all southern ports, to a point where actually nothing is coming in or coming out of Ukraine, stopping its export, stopping the import of war material and ammunition and others. And every day, 2 or 3 ships who dare to get into the Ukrainian waters get destroyed. So Russians are finally fighting gloves off, and their purpose is to deprive Ukraine of any ammunition coming to Ukraine from the European Union. They also attack rail junctions and locomotives, and there's just one by one is hit and destroyed and destroyed and destroyed systematically. They are trying to destroy a bridge leading to Romania, but that seems to be a complicated target, and it was only partially a hit. And of course, they hit the barges that go along the Danube to Romania. In other words, it's a massive assault on communications and logistics and delivery systems in Ukraine. Now, this is huge, and I'm just curious why the Western media doesn't cover it. But it's absolutely astounding the degree to which the Russians decided to put an end to the military capacity of Ukraine to deliver strikes on Russia. Now, in addition to defensive measures, offensive measures, the public opinion in Russia over the last 2 weeks has changed dramatically. I spoke about it in my previous video, but essentially there's a virtually universal demand to finish the war with a Russian victory quickly. No more negotiations, no more trying to find to a compromise. So that brings me to the diplomatic scene, and that is President Trump and his initiative to again send Witkoff uh, and Kushner to Moscow to negotiate. And he again is talking about intermediary and blah, blah, blah. The reason I say blah, 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 because the Russians are tired of it. They already seen it. This is déjà vu. The fact that counts now for the Russians is that it is a Trump's war. It is no longer Biden's war. It is Trump and Musk who provide satellite support for Ukrainian targeting of Russian targets. That officially means being a party to the war. That also means they can no longer pretend that they are not taking part. They are providing weapons to Ukraine via Europe that pays for it. So from the Russian point of view, who pays for it is irrelevant. Well, it is relevant, but the point is they are coming and they are being used against Russia. A kind of a minor stab in the back today was Turkey that sold 17 ATACMS missiles to Ukraine. As a matter of fact, Americans could have stopped it because these are American weapons and they have no right to sell them to anybody without American agreement, but they agreed apparently. So this basically means that Trump is irrelevant from the point of view of playing a role in negotiating anything, unless he simply accepts Putin's conditions, but that seems to be unlikely in the current climate in the United States. And finally, like a cherry on the cake of Russian anti-Russian sanctions and moves was the EU decision just 2 days ago to transfer $1.5 billion of stolen Russian assets to Ukraine. That is the interest on 200 billion Russian, as they call, immobilized or frozen Russian assets. So they took the interest, they stole it, and they transferred it to Ukraine. Now, the Russian commentators say that this is an assault on Russian sovereignty, that the EU would have to return one way or another, maybe even by force, by arresting EU assets in Russia when the time is ripe. In other words, this is a slap in the face to take Russian money and give it to Ukraine. And von der Leyen will be held personally accountable. This is what I hear from the Russian media. And now I'm coming to the bottom line. What does it all add up to? Well, it adds up to the military aspect. This is my conclusion, my dear friends. This is what I see. And I see that Ukraine will not be able to sustain this kind of Russian assault for a long time. It would mean that in a matter of a month or two, Ukrainian economy will collapse. This is one factory after another, one logistics center after another are being destroyed systematically by the Russian assault. That's number one. Number two is that the Russians are no longer interested in any compromise with Zelensky. That I have told you before, but I have heard in the last week a new kind of reasoning, which may or may not be, I cannot confirm or deny, may be that of Putin, because he's a lawyer. And basically, the argument is this, that when Ukraine began hitting the civilian targets, and openly so, admitting that they're doing it, not as a sorry collateral damage. This represents, from the point of view of international law, a war crime, and those that are doing it are terrorists. And when the state is doing it and openly declaring as doing it, that means it's a terrorist state. And Russia does not conduct negotiations with a terrorist state, but it will liquidate it. So that's the new language and the legal foundation for essentially regime change in Ukraine. It will be overthrown. How, when, by what means, we shall see in the coming events that we will follow. But this is new, a terrorist regime that has to be liquidated. Thank you very much, and I also invite you, if you haven't already, check my history series, Modern Russian History series, and that I have published 4 episodes already, and that they are on beginning on the Russian Civil War and the Revolution. You can check also my Substack channel, which is in the description. And I sometimes post all kinds of comments, political commentary on my Twitter account. Welcome to all of those. And of course, I invite you to read my latest book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin. And I shall see you certainly very shortly again for another edition of History and Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Goodbye.